A billionaire stepped out of his brand new Rolls Royce and froze when he saw a young waitress secretly giving her last $5 to a homeless beggar in the pouring rain. What happened the very next day left an entire city speechless. The rain hammered against the sidewalks of downtown Chicago as 24-year-old Emily Carter pulled her thin sweater tighter around her trembling shoulders. Her shoes were soaked through. Again. She glanced at the tiny crumpled bill inside her hand. $5. That was all she had left until payday. And payday was still 3 days away. Emily stood outside the small diner where she worked double shifts almost every day. The glowing neon sign buzzed above her head while exhausted customers rushed past without looking at her. Most nights, she skipped dinner just to keep enough money for rent. But despite everything life had thrown at her, Emily still smiled at strangers. Still held doors open. Still helped elderly customers carry groceries to their cars after work. Because her late mother had always told her something she never forgot. Being kind costs nothing, but it can mean everything to someone else. Emily repeated those words silently as she stared across the street. An old man sat alone beside a closed pharmacy. His gray beard was soaked from the rain. His thin coat barely covered his frail body, and a cardboard sign rested beside him. Hungry. Anything helps. Most people walked right past him. Some looked away. Others pretended not to notice him at all. Emily watched as the old man coughed violently into his sleeve. Her heart sank. She looked back down at the $5 in her hand. That money was supposed to buy ramen noodles and bus fare for the next 2 days. Without it, she'd have to walk 6 miles home tonight. Her stomach growled. For a brief moment, she hesitated. Then she took a deep breath, crossed the rain-soaked street, and knelt beside the old man. "Sir," she said softly, placing the money into his shaking hands, "please get yourself something warm to eat." The old man looked stunned. "Young lady, this is too much." Emily smiled gently, even as freezing rain dripped from her hair. "No," she whispered. "I think you need it more than I do." Tears filled the old man's eyes. People passing by slowed down, watching the scene unfold. But Emily didn't care who saw. The old man stared at her for several seconds, almost as if he recognized something in her soul. Then he quietly asked, "Why would you help someone like me when you clearly have so little yourself?" Emily's eyes softened. "Because I know what it feels like when nobody does." At that exact moment, a black luxury SUV stopped across the street. Inside sat a sharply dressed man watching everything through the tinted window. And the expression on his face suddenly changed completely. Because that homeless beggar was not who he appeared to be. Before we continue with this incredible journey, I spent countless hours researching and crafting this story to bring you something truly meaningful. If stories like this touch your heart and you want to see more acts of kindness that restore faith in humanity, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. It means the world to me and helps these important stories reach others who need to hear them. Now, let's see what happens next. Have you ever witnessed an act of kindness that completely changed your perspective? Share your story in the comments below. The rain finally slowed to a drizzle as Emily hurried toward the bus stop, pulling her sweater tightly around herself to fight the cold. Behind her, the old beggar still sat quietly beneath the pharmacy awning, staring down at the $5 bill in his hands as though it were worth a fortune. But across the street, inside the black SUV, billionaire entrepreneur Daniel Whitmore couldn't stop thinking about what he had just witnessed. "Did you see that?" he asked quietly. His driver nodded. "Most people wouldn't give away their last dollar like that." Daniel leaned back slowly. For months, he had disguised himself as a homeless man during random visits around the city. After building one of the largest tech companies in America, he had become obsessed with one question. Were genuinely kind people still out there? Most ignored him. Some insulted him. A few tossed coins at him without making eye contact. But that young waitress. She had looked him in the eyes. She had treated him like a human being. And somehow, Daniel could tell she was struggling herself. "Find out where she works," he said softly. The next morning, Emily dragged herself into Rosie's diner after walking nearly 2 hours because she couldn't afford bus fare. Her feet ached. Her stomach was empty. But the moment customers entered, she forced on her usual warm smile. "Good morning, welcome in." Around lunchtime, the diner door opened. Emily nearly dropped her coffee pot. Standing at the entrance was a tall, sharply dressed man in an expensive charcoal gray suit. Behind him, parked outside the diner window, sat a gleaming silver Rolls Royce. Every head inside the diner turned. Even her boss straightened his apron nervously. The man scanned the room calmly before his eyes landed on Emily. And then, he smiled. "Table for one," he said. Emily nodded awkwardly and guided him toward a booth near the window. As she handed him a menu, she noticed something strangely familiar about his eyes. "Can I start you off with coffee?" she asked. "Only if you'll sit down for a moment." Emily blinked. "Excuse me. I promise I'm not trying to get you in trouble," he said gently. "I just wanted to thank you." Her forehead creased in confusion. "For what?" Daniel studied her carefully before speaking. "For helping an old homeless man in the rain last night." Emily froze. Realization slowly spread across her face. "The man outside the pharmacy." Daniel nodded. "That was me." Emily stared at him speechlessly. "What?" A nervous laugh escaped her lips because the idea sounded completely ridiculous. But Daniel calmly pulled the cardboard sign from beneath the table beside him. The exact same one. "Hungry. Anything helps." Emily's eyes widened. "You're serious?" "I am. Why would someone like you pretend to be homeless?" Daniel sighed quietly. "Because when people think you're powerless, they show you who they really are." Emily sat down slowly. For the first time in years, Daniel spoke honestly to someone without mentioning business deals, money, or status. And for the first time in years, Emily felt truly seen. Not pitied. Not overlooked. Seen. "You gave away your last $5, didn't you?" Daniel asked softly. Emily looked down, embarrassed. "It wasn't a big deal. It was to me." A long silence passed between them. Then Daniel reached into his pocket and slid a small envelope across the table. Emily frowned. "What's this?" "Just a small thank you." She opened it carefully. Inside was $5,000. Emily's hands immediately started shaking. "No, no, I can't take this." Daniel smiled gently. "You already earned it the moment you chose kindness over comfort." Tears filled Emily's eyes instantly. Not because of the money. But because for the first time in a very long time, life had finally shown her kindness back. The $5,000 changed Emily's life overnight. For the first time in months, she paid her rent on time. She filled her tiny refrigerator with groceries instead of cheap instant noodles. And when she finally slept that night, she did something she hadn't done in years. She slept without fear. But even after the money helped her survive, Emily couldn't stop thinking about Daniel Whitmore. The billionaire who disguised himself as a homeless man. The man who had looked at her with more sincerity in one afternoon than most people had in her entire life. Over the next few weeks, Daniel kept returning to Rosie's diner. At first, Emily assumed he was simply being polite. But soon, their conversations became the best part of her day. Sometimes he arrived in expensive suits after meetings. Other times, he came dressed casually, sitting quietly in the corner booth while Emily refilled his coffee. And slowly, walls began to fall between them. "You know," Daniel said one evening, "most people treat waitresses like background noise." Emily chuckled softly. "Most billionaires don't eat grilled cheese at diners." Daniel laughed for the first time in days. It surprised even him. Because despite all his money, his life had become painfully lonely. People wanted things from him constantly. Business deals. Connections. Favors. But Emily never asked him for anything. Not once. And that mattered more than she realized. Meanwhile, the diner staff started whispering. Why does that billionaire keep coming here? You think they're dating? Her boss, Rosie, smiled knowingly one afternoon. That man looks at you like you hung the moon, sweetheart. Emily immediately blushed. But deep down, she was terrified. People like Daniel Whitmore belonged in skyscrapers and private jets. People like her barely survived month to month. The difference between their worlds felt impossible. Then came the obstacle neither of them expected. One morning, Emily arrived home to find an eviction notice taped to her apartment door. Her landlord was selling the building. All tenants had 30 days to leave. Emily's stomach dropped. Even with Daniel's gift, she couldn't afford a new apartment in the city. That night, she sat alone on a park bench trying not to cry. When Daniel found her there hours later, her eyes were red from holding back tears. What happened? He asked gently. Emily tried to smile. It's nothing. Emily. Her voice finally cracked. I'm losing my home. Daniel sat beside her quietly while she explained everything. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel said softly, you could stay somewhere temporary. I own properties downtown. Emily immediately shook her head. No. Why not? Because I don't want charity. Daniel's expression softened. This isn't charity. Yes, it is. Tears filled her eyes again. You already helped me once. I can't become another problem you fix. Daniel stared at her in silence. Then he said something that changed everything. You know why your kindness affected me so much that night? Emily looked at him quietly. Because you gave without making someone feel small. His voice lowered. And right now, you're making yourself feel small. Emily looked away instantly. Years of struggling had convinced her she was a burden. Someone people eventually walked away from. Daniel noticed the pain in her expression immediately. So instead of offering money again, he offered something else. Trust. Then let me help you find a solution together, he said gently. Not as a billionaire helping someone struggling. As a friend who cares about you. Emily's eyes filled with tears all over again. Because nobody had said those words to her in a very long time. A friend who cares about you. But just as hope started to return, another problem emerged. Photos of Daniel visiting the diner had leaked online. And by the next morning, headlines exploded across social media. Billionaire secretly dating waitress. Publicity stunt or real romance. Suddenly, reporters crowded outside Rosie's diner. Strangers filmed Emily on her way to work. Cruel comments flooded the internet. She's obviously after his money. Women like her always trap rich men. Emily was devastated. And for the first time since they met, she started wondering if walking away from Daniel was the only way to protect both of them. Emily didn't show up to work the next morning. Or the morning after that. Daniel sat alone in the diner booth, staring at the untouched cup of coffee in front of him while reporters crowded outside the windows like vultures. She quit, Rosie said quietly. Daniel looked up instantly. What? She said the attention was ruining your reputation. His jaw tightened. Then Rosie handed him a folded note. Daniel opened it slowly. Inside, Emily had written only one sentence. You were the first good thing that happened to me in years, and I refuse to become the reason people hurt you. Daniel closed his eyes. For years, the business world had taught him to solve problems with money. But this wasn't business. This was someone he genuinely cared about pulling away because she believed she wasn't worthy of standing beside him. And Daniel refused to let her disappear. 3 days later, Emily sat alone at a small laundromat on the edge of town, staring blankly at the spinning dryers. She had already started packing her apartment. Everywhere she looked online, people mocked her. Gold digger. Attention seeker. Poor girl chasing luxury. The comments hurt more than she wanted to admit. Because no matter how hard she tried to stay strong, part of her feared they were right. Maybe people from different worlds truly didn't belong together. Then suddenly, the laundromat television switched to a live news conference. And Emily froze. Daniel Whitmore stood behind a podium surrounded by cameras. Reporters shouted questions immediately. Mr. Whitmore, is your relationship with the waitress real? Did you pay her to participate in your homeless experiment? Is this a publicity stunt? Daniel looked directly into the cameras. Then he said something nobody expected. The woman you're attacking online is the kindest person I've met in my entire life. The room instantly fell silent. She gave her last $5 to someone she believed was homeless while she herself was struggling to survive. She didn't know cameras existed. She didn't know who I was. She helped because compassion is simply who she is. Emily's eyes filled with tears. Daniel continued. For years, I searched for genuine humanity in a world obsessed with wealth and status. And somehow, I found it in a diner waitress who expected nothing in return. The reporters stopped interrupting now. Even they were listening. Daniel's voice softened. So let me make this very clear. Emily Carter never asked me for money, fame, or attention. In fact, she walked away specifically to protect me from criticism. He paused. And honestly, the world could use more people exactly like her. Back at the laundromat, several strangers slowly turned toward Emily as recognition spread across their faces. But this time, their expressions were warm. Not judgmental. One elderly woman touched Emily's shoulder gently. Don't let the world harden your heart, sweetheart. Emily broke down crying. That same evening, Daniel arrived outside her apartment building. Not in the Rolls Royce. Not with security guards. Just him. Emily stepped outside slowly. You shouldn't be here, she whispered. Daniel smiled softly. I think this is exactly where I should be. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Then Daniel handed her a small set of keys. Emily frowned. What's this? A building. Her eyes widened. What? Daniel nodded toward the street corner. The old community center nearby was shutting down. So I bought it. Emily stared at him speechlessly. But here's the important part, he said. It's not mine anymore. She looked confused. Daniel smiled. It's yours. Emily's breath caught. Inside the renovated building were classrooms, a food pantry, temporary housing rooms, and job training offices. Everything designed to help struggling families get back on their feet. Tears streamed down Emily's face as she walked through the doors. You remembered everything I said, she whispered. Daniel nodded. You once told me the hardest part of being poor isn't hunger. Emily looked at him emotionally. It's feeling invisible. Daniel smiled gently. So let's build a place where nobody feels invisible anymore. 6 months later, the center had helped hundreds of families. Emily now managed the entire foundation. Former homeless individuals found jobs there. Single mothers received childcare support. Teenagers learned career skills. And every Friday night, Emily personally served meals to anyone who walked through the doors. Then came the full circle moment nobody could have imagined. One cold evening, Emily noticed an elderly homeless man sitting alone outside the center. Without hesitation, she walked over and placed money into his hands. But this time, She arrived in a silver Rolls Royce. And as Daniel watched from nearby with tears in his eyes, Emily smiled at the man and softly said, "I think you need it more than I do." This story shows how one act of kindness can change everything. What's one way you could make a difference in someone's life today? Challenge yourself and share your commitment in the comments. 2 years later, the Whitmore Community Center had become one of the most respected outreach programs in Chicago. What started with one $5 act of kindness had transformed into a movement that changed thousands of lives. Every morning, families lined up outside the center not just for meals or shelter, but for hope. Inside the once abandoned building, laughter now echoed through the hallways. Children studied in tutoring rooms. Single parents attended career workshops. Formerly homeless men and women worked full-time jobs helping others rebuild their lives. And at the heart of it all stood Emily Carter. But people barely recognized her now. Not because she wore expensive clothes or arrived in luxury cars, but because she carried herself differently. The fear that once lived behind her eyes was gone. In its place was confidence, purpose, peace. One afternoon, a young volunteer asked Emily, "How did all this even begin?" Emily smiled softly as she looked around the busy center. "With $5, she said. Meanwhile, Daniel Whitmore's life had changed just as dramatically. For years, he had built companies worth billions of dollars. But none of his business achievements ever fulfilled him the way this did. For the first time in decades, Daniel stopped measuring success by profit margins. Now, he measured it by lives changed. Meals served. Families reunited. Dreams restored. The story of Emily's kindness spread far beyond Chicago. Videos of the community center went viral online. People from around the country started donating supplies, money, and time. Soon, similar centers began opening in other cities inspired by Emily's story. But perhaps the most beautiful change happened quietly. Without cameras. Without headlines. Every Friday evening after the center closed, Emily and Daniel still walked through downtown together handing out food and blankets to homeless individuals personally. Because neither of them ever wanted to forget where this story began. One freezing winter night, Emily noticed a teenage girl sitting alone outside a convenience store. The girl looked exhausted. Scared. Hungry. Emily approached carefully and offered her a warm meal. The teenager hesitated before finally whispering, "Why are you helping me?" Emily smiled gently. Because suddenly, she saw herself in that frightened young girl. "I know what it feels like when nobody does." The same words. The same kindness. The same ripple effect continuing forward. Sometimes people believe changing the world requires millions of dollars, fame, or power. But stories like this remind us that real change often begins with something much smaller. A moment. A choice. A single act of compassion when nobody is watching. Emily didn't help that homeless man because she expected a reward. She helped because kindness was part of who she was even when life was hardest for her. And in a world where so many people feel invisible, forgotten, or alone, that kind of compassion becomes extraordinary. The truth is, every single person watching this has the power to change someone's life. Maybe it's buying a meal for someone hungry. Maybe it's encouraging a struggling friend. Maybe it's simply treating people with dignity when everyone else ignores them. Small acts matter more than we realize. Because you never truly know what battle someone is fighting silently. And sometimes, the smallest kindness becomes the beginning of an entirely new future. Stories like this remind us that extraordinary kindness exists all around us. If this touched your heart, please like this video, it helps more people discover these inspiring stories. Subscribe for more tales of human kindness that will restore your faith in humanity. And most importantly, look for opportunities in your own life to be someone's unexpected blessing. What act of kindness will you perform this week? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and remember, you have the power to change someone's entire world.